favorite people, President Bill Clinton. Good to see you. So here's my question. It seems that every time something goes wrong in Washington, they seem to blame it on you. They say, well, you know, it's Bill Clinton's fault. And now the economy, they've now dragged you into it. Did you do it, Bill? Did you mess it up?
Well, as I remember, it was pretty good then.
I thought so too, but
We
maybe...
let's be serious. We had really good economic results when I was president. We had lots of jobs, we ran surpluses, we had a reduction in poverty. In my second term, for the first time in almost 30 years, inequality was going down. That is, people at the middle and bottom were rising faster in percentage terms than people at the top. That was all good. And we had a 6% reduction in welfare rolls. Things were really moving well. Now, to be fair, what the serious critics are saying is you need to go back and look, because we also had an almost quadrupling of the stock market when Bill Clinton was president. We went from 3,200 to almost around 12,000.
Right.
And maybe some of the things they did then contributed to the long-term instability and kind of drunken sailor routines that we have lived through the last 7 years.
Right.
So I actually have gone back and tried to evaluate that. I think that the thing most often cited, that we repealed a bill called Glass-Steagall, which said that banks couldn't get into investment banking. I think in all probability that did not make much contribution to what's going on here. Because if you look, the most important thing that happened yesterday, and it broke late last night, so there's not a lot of press on it, but the two remaining big investment banks, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, filed to be reorganized, if you will, as bank holding companies. Now, from a taxpayer's point of view, you may say, oh, this is bad. This means they can borrow money from the Federal Reserve. You should be glad about this, because what it means is that they'll become more like a bank, which means they can't do anything like these funny derivatives where they don't have to be transparent about what you're buying, and they can have unlimited risks. They have to have capital. In other words, it'll be, all their investments will be more solid. And that's one of the things that was permitted by this legal change I made. You could argue that we should have been more aggressive against these so-called derivatives. Derivatives are just ways of pushing the risk further and further away from the person that made the loan, in the case of housing. But once we looked at it once, and we just got killed. Nobody in the Congress wanted to do it. You could argue that we should have reined in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, even though there were no problems then. But when we tried to do that, I sent a guy to Capitol Hill. We were laughing. We had both the Democrats and Republicans all over us because they had so much political money to give out. That was a mess. It's an embarrassment to America, and I'm glad we got it fixed. We should
demand that whoever the leader is next gets a good handle on this and changes it too.
Absolutely. Look, it's always a mistake to bet against America, folks. Anybody who's done it for the last 200 years wound up losing money.
Right.
But we basically made too much money out of money. We can go through this whole thing if you want. But essentially,
it's only an hour show.
And wild,
we do want to talk about your initiative.
Risk-taking, unaccountability has led us to this. I do support, by the way, what Secretary Paulson and Mr. Bernanke, the Federal Reserve head, are trying to do now, but it's not enough. That is, go back to what Whoopi said. This whole thing started in a mortgage crisis. Most of these people who are being foreclosed on are good, honest people who could make a mortgage payment. That's why I think Hillary's right. She said, look, it's not enough just to bail out these big banks. You need to set up a deal like we had in the Depression and renegotiate all these people's mortgages and give them a mortgage they can pay, and we might actually wind up making money. I predict to you that by the time we get through this first debate at Ole Miss, and they'll probably have to ask it, even though it's national security, that's where they'll both have to be, because you don't want this to be a Wall Street bailout. You're saving the financial system. Keep in mind, more than half the American people have a direct or indirect interest in the stock market.
That's right.
But it only works if you help Main Street. So you got to do something about the underlying mortgage debt. And these working people, most of them can make a mortgage payment. Most of them only ask themselves the same question I asked myself when I bought a house so Hillary and I'd have a place to live when we got married. Can I make the monthly payment? They didn't think about subprime, adjustable interest, all that. We need to fix this, and we can do it now.
What about the initiative you've been working on for the Clinton Global Initiative? It started, what, 3 years ago, right?
Yeah, 2005.
And can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Very briefly, when I got out of office, I set up a foundation. And I worked on making AIDS drugs more affordable around the world and malaria drugs. Then I worked on promoting economic development in poor countries and poor neighborhoods. There are 28 million working Americans that don't have a bank account. I'm trying to get them into the banking system. And I'm dealing with childhood obesity. So I was doing all these things, and I realized I'm running out of capacity to do this, but everybody ought to be doing something. In the 21st century world, especially after this financial problem, whether you're a liberal Democrat or a conservative Republican, there will never be a time when both the perfect free market and a perfect government will solve all the problems. That's why there's an explosion of all these citizens groups working in breast cancer, autism, helping poor people, teaching people to read, you know, the whole thing. And what I tried to do was to give a meeting place at the opening of the United Nations so that world leaders could come together with wealthy philanthropists and ordinary citizens groups from around the world and around America, study these problems and make specific commitments to do things. So in the last 3 years, this is the 4th year, we've had 1,000 commitments made by probably over 2,000 individuals and groups that help 200 million people in 150 countries and are worth about $30 billion, just by giving people a way to come